morning and welcome to the Big Story on Daybreak Live, where we dissect the issues that shape our nation and challenge our collective conscience. Today we'll navigate one of the most sensitive and defining questions in our democratic experience: national security versus the rule of law. Where should the balance tilt? At the heart of this conversation lies a dilemma. How do we protect the state without undermining the very laws that define it? In recent years, Nigeria has witnessed several instances where the tension between national security and the rule of law has been tested. From continued detention of individuals despite court orders, such as the cases involving former National Security Advisor Sambo Dasuki and the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, to the controversial invasion of judges' homes and security operatives. The nation continues to grapple with where to draw the line. This moment have raised critical questions about constitutional supremacy, human rights, and the discretionary powers of state security agencies. To help us unpack and, of course, make sense of it all, we are joined by a man whose voice carries both authority and experience in matters of law, governance, and civic accountability, Barrister Wale Ojoge-Daniel, a seasoned public affairs analyst, human rights activist, and a barrister at law. He will be helping us unpack this delicate balance. When security and justice clash, which one should take precedence? Thank you for joining us on the show this morning. This is The Big Story. I'm Barrister Wale Ojoge-Daniel is here with me in the studio. Good to have you here once again.
Yeah, my awesome host. It's my pleasure to be here, and I say good morning to all Nigerians listening to us.
Thank you for joining us. Now, this is a very difficult topic, and it's a very sensitive one. National security versus the rule of law. Where should the balance tilt?
Well, the constitutional dichotomy has been a persistent one, both under the military and democratic regime. First and foremost, I would like to look at what is even the rule of law. At least for the purpose of those listening to us, they want to understand what the rule of law means. What does national security means? National security is an enduring responsibility of the state to safeguard its sovereignty, stability, and collective well-being of its citizens and institutions against both external and internal threats, using lawful means consistent with the constitutional order. I say consistent with the constitutional order because the Constitution represents what we call the ground norm, that is highest law. And this position is fortified when you look at Section 1, subsection 1 of the Constitution, that says, this Constitution shall be supreme. Now, talking about rule of law could be defined as a constitutional doctrine that emphasizes the supremacy of the Constitution as administered by legally constituted and impartial law courts. But there are three ingredients to rule of law. One is equal subjection of all citizens and institutions before the law of the land. That is equality before the law. The second one is called supremacy of the Constitution as enshrined under Section 1, subsection 1 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended. The third one talks about the independence of the three arms of government: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. So the topic before us actually underscores, the constant and usual, dichotomy or dilemma between constitutionalism and executive overreach. Which one prevails? In a nutshell, it should be a measured equilibrium, but the scale is always in favor of the rule of law. Because when you talk about a secure state without rule of law, then you are talking about a prison of fear. When you talk about, a law guided by rule of law without security, then that is anarchy by freedom. So it's always a measured equilibrium. And there's a plethora of authorities. Our courts have always, tilted the scale in favor of rule of law. And a very locus classical that comes to my mind is Lacomi's case. That was in 1966 when the military took over and confiscated his properties. Lacomi and other versus Attorney General of Western States. In fact, that represents the high moral ground of constitutionalism, because the court stood its ground that no emergency, no necessity can permit the government to suspend rule of law. Even though in 1970, the military government went ahead to promulgate another decree. Since we operate the doctrine of stare decisis et non quae movere, we follow established rules so that that will not become the precedent. It will not serve as the precedent. So the military regime went ahead in 1970 and promulgated a decree to nullify the importance of that precedent set in Lacomi's case.
Okay, very quickly, there's this particular question I would love to ask you very quickly. Many argue that both national security and the rule of law are pillars of national stability. Now, one seems to, just like you said earlier, that the rule of law most times takes the upper hand when it comes to the case of national security. Now, why is that balance difficult to maintain? In some cases, there are court injunctions and still not followed.
Yes, both the rule of law and the national security are like they are co-pillars that ought to coexist for the sustenance of our constitutional architecture. And why it is essential that the rule of law prevails is because there is that instinct on part of the government to preserve itself, not just the state. This time around, the government of the day will use the doctrine of necessity, national interest, in order to justify, some atrocities. Look at the case you just mentioned now, that of Dasuki. Court is the first and the last hope of the common man. The court is to interpret the law. And everybody, including institutions of government, should be bound by the decisions of the court. When you look at Section 36, subsection 5 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, it makes it clear, categorical and unequivocal, that every accused person is presumed innocent until his guilt is proved. So the moment somebody has not been adjudged guilty, the position of the law, the balance tilts in the favor of that person, because he's still a suspected person. And the law says, equi affirmat non equi negat incubi probatio. Affirmanti non neganti incubi probatio. The burden of proof is on he who alleges and not he who denies. So Section 36(5) is germane in this instance, to the effect that the state has no right to detain an individual in clear contravention and abjuration of court order when that person has not been convicted. That reminds me of this principle of law that is settled. This principle of law says, "Tuchos semper es errare acquitendo, quam impugnendo es parte misericordiam, quam es parte justitia." That it is safer to allow 12 guilty men to go scot-free than to punish an innocent soul. That serves but to corroborate the connotation and denotation of the ingredient in Section 36(5) of the Constitution that talks about the presumption of innocence.
Now, is there such thing like too much security in a democracy and too much freedom under the rule of law?
Yes, like I said ab initio, it should be a measured equilibrium, right? Because a secured state without rule of law is a prison of fear. And when you talk about, unfettered rights too, then you are bringing anarchy by freedom. But we have to look at the essence of the state. The essence of the state as enshrined in section 14 subsection 2b of the Constitution makes it clear that the primary purpose of government shall be the security and welfare of the people. Security and welfare of the people. When you expand that section, you come to realize that it's not actually talking about primarily about welfare of the states, but like Yoruba would say, Ara Orokun, Ara Oradiye, they are intertwined. If the state in which you live is chaotic, you cannot even enjoy your rights. If your rights, your inalienable rights are taken away, then the state becomes, that of tyranny. So I say that it should be a measured equilibrium.
What role should the judiciary play when executive actions threaten the very pillars that holds the rule of law?
Yes, like I just said now, that Lacomi's case in 1966 represents the high moral ground of constitutionalism. It was a brief attempt to call the bluff of the state that no emergency can justify the invocation of doctrine of necessity without proportionality and lawful justification. So the role of the judiciary is to preserve the law of the land, to interpret and preserve the law of the land. We have three arms of government: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The executive implements. The legislature makes the law. The judiciary interprets the law. So the role of the judiciary is very fundamental. The role of judiciary is fundamental, and that is why it is said that judiciary is the first and last hope of the common man. So where, a government treats the order of courts with levity and impunity, then the state is sliding into authoritarianism or tyranny.
Do you think the Nigerian security agencies are trained enough or educated enough to know the limits of their power under the law? Putting some cases into context in the country as we speak.
Well, I don't want to answer that question in the affirmative. Right? My answer, tilts towards the negative.
Okay.
It is not my opinion that they are well trained, because from my years of practice of law, I've come across, some officers who don't even know their left from their right hand. Some time ago, I met a police officer who went to apprehend a suspect. Unfortunately, he didn't meet him, and he arrested his brother. And I told him, this is right. He said, how come this is the way we've been doing it? I said, that you have been doing something wrong. It's not a justification for doing the wrong
So
thing.
when they arrest the brother, the other one will come to the police station.
You can see, and that is extrajudicial. That is unconstitutional. When you look at the Administration of Justice Act, it makes it clear that you cannot arrest A in lieu of B. You can't arrest by proxy.
There was a situation recently where the mother was arrested because the boy was not found.
It happens. That's why I am contending that the answer to your question is not in the affirmative, but in the negative, that most of them are not trained. Most of them lack the requisite knowledge of law.
Do you think 6 months is enough to train a police officer in the current situation? We have seen police officers who, after that particular training, they have not gone for any training or retraining after that, and they are practicing. They are still in the service.
Yes. Leopard doesn't change its color. Even when you train them for 6 years. You see, when you set a table and a chair for a Nigerian, you make him a thank God. When you go to the police environment, justice environment, you see that aura of they wear that toga of God. They are supposed to, they are in law civil servants, but they turn themselves into civil masters. So when you get to their environment, they're always like this. So you hardly can change that mentality. Then I have come to realize that there is even that of knowledge. An average Nigerian, with due respect, is an ignoramus. He doesn't even know his right hand from his left hand. I was on a program some time ago where I made it clear that Nigerians are not entitled to good things. Nigerians are not in law entitled to good governance. Nigerians in law are not entitled ex debito justitia, that is as of right, to democratic dividends.
Why did you say that?
Because we go by the law. Law is an instrument of social control. When you look at the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Section 1, subsection 1 says, this law shall be supreme. That is, whatever we do, we are bound by it. It goes ahead to insert Chapter 2. Just like the Chapter 4 I mentioned now, Fundamental Rights, Section 33 to Section 44. Those are enforceable rights. But when you look at Chapter 2, it's a beautiful masterpiece that talks about, how Nigerians should be entitled to good life, housing facility, free education, health, and so on and so forth. Beautiful masterpiece. That is the document that guarantees your right to good governance. But it goes ahead to insert what we call ouster clause in Section 6, subsection 6, C of the same Constitution, that the first and the last hope of the common man, that is the judiciary, must not talk about Chapter 2. That is silencing the judiciary in terms of interpretation of Chapter 2, in terms of giving effect and efficacy to the provisions of Chapter 2. So, legally speaking, jurisprudentially speaking, it means Chapter 2 is cosmetic, redundant, and not in existence. The corollary, connotation, and denotation is that Nigerians are not ex debito justitia, that is as of right, entitled to good life, because the government is not accountable to Nigerians.
When the judiciary cannot hold them
We are
accountable.
not accountable.
Okay, you mentioned something earlier about security operatives, being demigods in their environment. Now, how do we break that yoke, and whose responsibility is it?
Well, in my view, I've always canvassed this argument that it is time we try to modify the doctrine of vicarious liability, because it has always been used both as a shield and sword against the citizens the security agents are meant to protect. What do I mean? If an officer of the state wrongs you, he has almost nothing to lose because he's an agent of the state. So the state is vicariously responsible for his wrongdoing. It is time now that we look at, reforming that law so that erring officers can actually be held personally accountable
For their wrongdoing.
for their wrongdoing.
This happens in...
How many officers have been charged to court with assault? And they assault civilians on daily basis. Go to the police station and see the way they assault civilians with levity and impunity.
In advanced countries like the United Kingdom, the US, it's almost all the time it's in the news that one police officer or the other are being prosecuted for crimes committed, even while in the uniform.
While in the uniform, yes.
But that hasn't happened in Nigeria.
It really happens.
But we sometimes see videos of police officers, even soldiers, being disarmed. But then what happens after that?
there's what I call scapegoating. Sometimes the EMS man might scapegoat some officers just to protect his integrity and his office. It happens. So if you are caught on camera, as an officer misbehaving, you might be in for it.
Okay, so in your experience on the field, does the Nigerian Constitution protect the interest of the Nigerian people? And the rule of law, is it just a slogan or an actual practice in the country as we speak?
Yeah, talking about the interest of Nigerian people, yeah, we have to streamline. You see, we have to narrow it down. What precisely are we saying? If we are talking about, some rights like right to life, right to liberty, right to dignity, I'm talking about those rights encapsulated in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. They are stricto sensu enforceable. These are rights you can enforce. Take, for instance, under Section 35 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as amended, it is made clear that the power of the police to detain a suspected person in respect of a bailable offense or non-capital offenses is limited to 24 hours. Where there is a court within a radius of 40 kilometers. In the absence of that, there is that power to detain, beyond 24 hours, and the maximum is 48 hours. If you are detained beyond 48 hours, in respect of minor offenses, like assault occasioning harm, stealing, and co., you are protected by virtue of Section 36 sub 5. You are an innocent person. So by virtue of that, you are still entitled to the paraphernalia of rights that an innocent person is entitled to. So the police cannot detain you for more than 24 hours, in other cases 48 hours. If this happens, the prescription of the Constitution is that you are entitled to compensation and public apology.
Now,
so when you are talking about rights contained under Chapter 4, they're enforceable. But when you are talking about democratic dividends, like right to education, right to health, housing facility, they are not enforceable. It's as good as you don't have such rights. So Nigerians don't, ex debito justitia, have rights to good life.
Now, let me draw this from what you said earlier so we can make it clearer. How do we strike a balance between protecting citizens from threats and when the state itself is the threat against the people?
That's a very deep one. That's a very deep one. The answer is, I want to be mindful of the word I use, all right? Because the limit of every oppressive regime is prescribed by the docility of the oppressed or their quantum of resistance. So in a situation whereby the state becomes the threat, right, then that means the state is sliding into tyranny. The state is sliding into authoritarianism, right? When a man is pushed to the wall, nemo denetu ad impossibly, there is nothing he will do than just, to come back. All right, lex non cogit ad impossibilia. The law itself does not command impossibility. So usually what happens is revolts.
So what are the things we can consider as threats to the people, engineered by the state?
One, poverty. Poverty is a threat to life. And that's why I've always held this, position that the government we have in this country, not the present government alone, we can describe governance in Nigeria as genocide in slow motion.
Genocide in slow motion.
In slow motion. We are politicians, the people I call politicians, distribute okadas as a form of empowerment. Go to the hospital and see the way bikers, the riders, die on daily basis. Even the people they pick, the way they die, a lot of people have been injured. Is that not genocide? Is giving Okada a form of reasonable empowerment? where the government is looking the other way and not able to give effect and efficacy to the law of the land, vis-a-vis people coming onto the street to beg for arms. When this is being criminalized, it is an offense for you to come onto the street and be begging for arms. But because the state is aware that it has failed the people, so the state has endorsed poverty.
Have you been to Mokola roundabouts lately? Have you been to Sabo? Have you been to Ojaoba?
That is just to tell you
Those are the
that,
headquarters.
yeah, so I mean, that is to tell you that this is what in law we call res ipsa loquitur, the fact that speaks for itself. When you go to those areas you just mentioned, you will know that the Nigerian state has endorsed poverty, because the people there, I mean, are not supposed to be there. In law, what they are doing is wrong, right? But the state cannot act, because the state know that is the cause of poverty. Aristotle says poverty is the mother of revolution and crime. So the poverty engendered by the state led to the commission of the crime, vis-a-vis coming onto the street to beg for arms in clear violation of the provision of the criminal code, and the state cannot do anything. So because the state lacks the moral, I mean, authority to punish what it has brought into being, which is poverty.
Now, with the current situation of things, is there change in sight, especially when you said that poverty has been weaponized in Nigeria? Would there ever be any form of change?
Well, I would want to use the position of Amita Letsione, a renowned political scientist. He says, politics is a game of the elite, and masses will remain a pawn. The meaning is that the beneficiaries of an evil status quo are forever committed to its preservation. Paul Biya ruled for 43 years. He wants to continue to rule, despite, I mean, having brought his people into, I mean, a state of penury and poverty. That is to tell you that your oppressor would not want to let go. This underscores the significance, the purpose, and the importance of the position enunciated by the former American president, J.F. Kennedy, that those who make peaceful changes impossible make violent changes inevitable. This underscores the emerging threat of revolution, threat of revolt, which is always a corollary, which is always a necessity, where people are being treated with impunity. Their rights are being taken away with impunity. Politicians have arrogated to themselves, I mean, ownership of the resources of Nigeria. When you look at the FAC, that is a Federal Allocation Committee, now, the data collected there says about 70 or 75% of what we earn in Nigeria goes, takes care of the cost of governance. Now they are talking about creation of more states. Is that not genocidal? Because it means what is even being left, about 25%.
For the people.
For the people, like, will be taken away. That means your roads the network of roads will deteriorate the more, even though we don't even have good roads, right? It means that, the state of the hospital now, which is like death clinic, will deteriorate. Go to our public schools. Politicians don't send, they cannot eat what they give to Nigerians. The schools they want Nigerians to attend, they cannot send their own children there. When they become ill, they cannot even, just for mere headache, they travel abroad. Do you know that they don't even use the Nigerian formulation? That is drugs. Right. So how do you describe this class of people, this crop of politicians? I look at Africa, and I have my respect for very few people. We say democracy is beautiful. Yes, beautiful. Since I came to this planet Earth, I've seen just one man who stands as primus inter pares non secundum, first among his equals, second to none. That is the late sage, Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Because the system is like a stage. Just like this is a stage now. If you bring different analysts, they will have different opinions.
Right.
So the problem is not with the system, it's about leadership. Awolowo was able to perform excellently. Now it's being studied all over. Under the same system where others failed. We say democracy is beautiful. If not for Jerry Rawlings, today Ghanaians would have remained our slaves. Because I remember in those days, I would just stand at my balcony and say, hey, Sobata. Because they were migrating away from Ghana. Until somebody came and liquidated the old order. I think he executed 3 of his predecessors to send jitters down the spine.
They sink down.
Yes. Today, I mean, electricity in Ghana is not something you can compare with Nigeria. We say democracy is beautiful. But in Africa today, do you know that no democratic regime could ever match what the man you call a tyrant did in Libya?
Muammar Gaddafi.
Muammar Gaddafi gave all the Libyan citizens free education. And if you have to go abroad, the state will foot the bill of your education, housing, food abroad. Gaddafi gave all Libyan citizens free electricity. Libyans were not paying for electricity during Gaddafi's regime.
What they do now?
It's a different ballgame now. During Gaddafi's regime, water was free. I don't know the position of the dam, the artificial dam he created then, but water was supplied to every home free of charge. In fact, if you dare marry, you are in trouble because you are getting money.
we have to go this morning.
If you have children, you are in trouble because you are getting child support.
That's really interesting.
And that is the man you call a tyrant. The West liquidated him because the West would never want Africa to develop. They say you want independent Africa. That was why they killed Gaddafi, not because he did not do well. No democratic
I'll bring you back on this show to unpack this particular topic and how the West underdeveloped Africa. That's one thing we'll talk about. This is an extensive topic on its own, and we cannot take that on the show this morning as our time is fast spent. Thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm always ready and mentally fortified.
Thank you for joining us. All right, when the stage is ready, the people are ready. That will be the convenient point to draw the curtains on today's edition of The Big Story on Daybreak Live. Thank you for being a part of the show so far. Let's go to a quick break. When we return, the show continues. A big thank you to my guest this morning, Barrister Wale Ojoge Daniel, and we'll do hope to bring him back here some other time. All right, let's go on the break. We'll be back.